be really a transformative platform for our community.
Yeah, it's for the culture.
It forced me and challenged me to challenge myself. The opportunity to create wealth has changed.
You were made for greatness. Oh, you were made for greatness, baby. You were made for greatness. And don't you let them tell you nothing else. Yeah. You were made for greatness. Oh, you were made for greatness, baby. You were made for greatness. And don't you let them tell you nothing else. Yeah. Reporting to you live from the gutter.
We have to create the environment for them, to share themselves and to share their ideas and their thoughts. Maybe a $100,000 thought that day, but it might be a $10 billion thought the next.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I appreciate all of you for sticking around this morning. First, I'd like to start off by thanking the internX team for inviting me to speak with you all about how to secure the internship. And I know for a lot of you all, summer is right around the corner. And for many of you, that means you're finishing up final exams, you're packing up your things to get ready to go home. And a lot of you all will be diving headfirst into 10 to 12-week internships with a company that'll hopefully be a launching pad for your future professional success. And so a few years back, I was actually in your same position. I was getting ready to start an internship and had no idea what the future would look like. But I know for many of you all, these opportunities will be great when it comes to your professional career endeavors. And so I get, that time between now and signing that offer letter might be very stressful. So I'm here to equip you all with the tools you'll need to be successful this coming recruiting season. And so with that being said, there's 3 overarching areas we're going to cover in our short time together. Specifically, we'll discuss steps to building standout resumes. We'll talk a little bit more about the art of networking, both virtually and in person, and things to keep in mind when navigating career fairs. And then once we get through all of that, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you may all have at the end. So before we dive in, I'd first like to start off by letting you all in on a little bit more about myself. Again, my name is Lauren Lewis, and I did my undergraduate studies at Spelman College. So like all of you all, I proudly attended an HBCU. And while I was at Spelman, I was a UNCF Charles Cook Foundation Scholar. And so a few years back, the program actually partnered with the internX team, and I was actually able to land 2 internships with the help of the platform. One of which actually led to a full-time opportunity at a tech company in Dallas, Texas, where I worked as an associate talent acquisition partner and led an award-winning summer internship program. So I'm very familiar with working with entry-level talent like yourself. And then after working in this role for a little over a year, I knew I wanted to make a change when it came to the career that I was pursuing. So last fall, I actually went back to school. I'm actually a current student at Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business, where I'm pursuing a Master of Science in Management, and I'll be graduating in May of this year. And so with all of that being said, let's talk about resumes. Before we go into the nitty-gritty of how to build and optimize your resume, I want to let you all in on a little secret. First impressions matter, and getting hired starts with a great resume. Remember that the resume is oftentimes the first thing a recruiter will see when they look at your application. And if you want to increase your odds of getting invited to interview and down the line ultimately receiving that offer, you're going to want to make sure that it's professional, concise, and speaks to who you are, what you do, and the value you'll add to the organization or to that role. And so I'm sure by now you're all wondering what makes a resume good versus great. And one of the things that most people overlook, especially when it comes to constructing their resumes, are keywords. So keywords are basically those critical phrases or words that you're going to find in a job description. And so basically that is what the recruiter is looking for in their ideal candidate. And so nowadays, especially with some of the advancements that we're seeing in technology and the larger applicant pools that we're seeing in the past couple of years, applicant tracking systems are going to do most of the heavy lifting when it comes to sifting through those resumes. And if you want to actually increase your chances of an actual human being reading your application, instead of having the artificial intelligence reject it, you're going to want to include those keywords in your resume when they're applicable to your background and your experiences. And then another important aspect of securing that internship is creating targeted resumes for every single job that you apply to. And so this goes hand in hand with including those keywords, but it's important to make sure that you're only submitting resumes that are applicable to the roles that you're applying to. And so it's important to keep in mind that roles are going to vary company by company. And so you want to make sure that whoever is reading that application knows without a doubt that you're a good fit for that position. So for example, when I was in undergrad, I was looking at both internships in human resources and UX research. And so those are two completely unrelated fields. So I had to make sure that I had different iterations of my resume for those opportunities. The next tip that I want to leave you all with is to use action and power verbs. Remember, applicant tracking systems, they're doing most of the work. And while that is the case, recruiters are definitely still reading through resumes. And so it's important to keep in mind that on average, a recruiter is going to spend about 6 seconds or so reading through that resume. And so you want to make sure that within those 6 seconds, you're able to capture their attention and maximize impact. And so on the next slide, I'll actually go through a couple of examples of these. That way you all can kind of visualize what I'm talking about. And then another thing that I want to reiterate are that resumes are an opportunity for you to sell yourself to a prospective employer. So you're going to want to make sure that you're actually quantifying your accomplishments to maximize impact. So keep in mind that resumes, they're not simply just a list of responsibilities. They're more so a list of the things that you accomplished in that position. Remember, you want the hiring team to truly understand why they just have to bring you on board. And so for this section, I typically recommend that students actually format their accomplishments in the PAR method, using the PAR method. And so basically that's process, action, result. So you're going to want to start off with the process that you took. Then you're going to want to segue into the action that you took to actually kind of facilitate that process. And then you're going to want to end with a quantifiable result. So for example, somebody might say that they initially grew revenue for small and medium business clients by 15% quarter over quarter. Now, don't get me wrong, that's actually pretty good. But something that might be a little bit better that you want to think about integrating into your resume is that you would say, for example, that you grew revenue for small and medium business clients by mapping new software features as solutions to their business goals, thus growing revenue 15% quarter over quarter. So I started off with the process. I then described the action. And then by saying that 15% quarter over quarter, I was able to quantify the result. Another thing that you're going to want to do just when creating a resume is you're going to want to magnify your skills section. And so a great way to do that is by incorporating some of the skills that you're going to see in the job description or some of those keywords that I was talking about earlier into the skills section. And so it's important to keep in mind that, you know, when you're making that skills section, they can be both hard and soft skills. I think it's common misconception among students that they only have to be technical or hard skills, and that's just not the case. It is okay to include soft skills such as, you know, customer service, leadership, or cross-functional communication. But if you still don't feel like you have those hard skills that employers are looking for, it's more than okay to think deeply about some of the things that you've learned in school or in the classroom. Those are really great examples of skills. But even still, if you know you're having trouble figuring out what those skills are, I always recommend that students look at free certifications through LinkedIn Learning. I know that internX has a lot of really great resources, so I would definitely recommend that you start there. And if you still don't feel like you're an expert quite yet, it's more than okay to, you know, look at YouTube as well to kind of gain new skills. And, you know, you don't have to be an expert to include a skill on your resume. It's more than okay to actually write out that skill and then say in parentheses that you're a beginner, you're an intermediate, et cetera, et cetera. And then one of the last tips that I want to leave you all with is to keep it consistent. This means at this stage in your career, you want to make sure that your resume is no longer than a page. You also want to make sure that your tenses are correct. So for example, if I'm working in a job currently, I want to make sure that I'm using present tense. And then if it's a job from my past, I want to make sure that my bullet points are in past tense. And then you also just want to make sure that your font, your sizing, your bullet points are all in alignment. I promise you these things really do make a difference, and recruiters will notice if they're off. So don't eliminate yourself from opportunities because of easy to fix issues like these. And so like I promised a little bit earlier, here are a list of the power verbs that internX has shared that you all can leverage to completely transform how your resume is reading. So for example, instead of saying that you maybe led something, try saying that you spearheaded or you directed something. Remember, it's the little upgrades that are going to make a world of difference. And so, like I mentioned earlier, I was a former early careers recruiter, so I've seen just about everything when it comes to some of the mistakes that students can make on their resumes. First and foremost, don't include confidential information such as your address or your date of birth. And so I'm sure you might be wondering, why is that the case? Well, because, no matter how illegal it is to discriminate against candidates, people are still biased. So it's definitely an unfortunate reality sometimes. And so I typically suggest that students use the nearest or the largest metropolitan city close to them on their resume instead. The next thing is flashy templates. I know. Some of the resume templates that are out there fit your aesthetic or they're super creative. I get it. I sometimes want to use them too. But the ATS technology that's out there just isn't that advanced. And so basically, the ATS is not able to transform these templates into readable PDFs on the back end. And I cannot tell you how many times I've gone into the applicant tracking system on my side of things, pulled up resumes, and then just not been able to read them. And if I can't read it, I can't tell if you're a good fit for the position. And most likely in those cases, your resume will get thrown out, and we don't want this to happen. The next few tips are really simple to follow, but sometimes a lot of students will make mistakes in regards to them. The first one that I want to talk about is using difficult to read fonts. It kind of goes hand in hand with using flashy templates. I know some fonts out there nowadays are super cool and they look really good. But once again, if it's difficult to read, recruiters aren't going to waste their time trying to figure it out. They have a lot of different things that they have to do throughout the day. They have hundreds of applications they're looking through. If I can't read it, once again, I can't tell if you're a good fit for my position, and most likely your resume will get thrown out. So typically I tell students to stick to those easy to read fonts such as Times New Roman or Arial. Now, when it comes to references, I know that a lot of students will oftentimes put references on their resume, but it's really not necessary. Remember that space is limited. You only have about a page or so to communicate to that employer why you're a good fit for that position. So save that precious space for something else that will create a bigger impact. And remember, if they want a reference, you're more than, willing or more than free to give it to them at that time, but it's just really not necessary at the beginning of the interview process when they're looking through your applications. Another thing that I often see when it comes to resumes are images. Once again, space is limited. So having an image on your resume, a picture of yourself, is just not really important because, one, it's taking up valuable space. And two, what you look like is just not relevant to whether or not you can accomplish or carry out the functions of that role in which you're applying. So definitely save those for social media or LinkedIn where they may be better fitted. And then finally, this is a mistake that I see people make all the time, but it's such an easy fix. It's typos and grammatical errors. So when you're finally, you finished up that resume, make sure that you're spell checking it. And then maybe spell check it another time for good measure. And typically, I also recommend that people pass it on to a family member, a friend, or maybe the career development office to look through one final time for good measure. So remember, don't miss out on easy opportunities or incredible opportunities because of easy to fix mistakes. And so here is a quick anatomy of a resume. Keep in mind, you're going to start your resume off by briefly discussing your education. So that includes, your major, your minor, your GPA, if you wish to include it, and then any relevant coursework. But also just know that after your first year of college, you shouldn't be including anything from high school on your resume anymore. One, because again, space is limited. But two, recruiters, we want to see the impact that you're having on your campus community. So I would definitely recommend it that, after freshman year is wrapped up, that should not be on your resume anymore. The next section is really focused on the bulk of your professional experiences. So that's going to be a large component of your resume. So remember that, when you're crafting this section, you're using that PAR method, the process action result format that I was discussing a little bit earlier when it comes to kind of creating your bullet points. That way that can aid you when you're writing that component. And if you're lacking experience like I did when I was in school, I completely understand you're not alone. Something that a lot of students opt to do instead is to include a project section. So this is a really great opportunity for you to talk about some of the projects that you're working on in school and some of the skills that you've developed as a result of those projects. And then lastly, the bottom of your resume. You're going to want to briefly discuss your skills, both hard and soft, and then any awards or certifications that you received. And then something that we're starting to see a lot of nowadays is that tech companies in particular, they oftentimes like to know what people are doing outside of their work. So it's more than okay to speak to some of the hobbies you have or some of your interests, as long as they're honest and you're able to speak to it in an interview just in case you're asked about it. Alrighty, so let's transition into our next topic, which is networking. So remember, networking is not about collecting contacts. It's about building relationships. And, when I entered college, that was just not something that I understood. My parents would always throw around the phrase, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I honestly hate it when they said that because I was super naive and I honestly believed that opportunities were awarded solely based on merit. But it wasn't until I entered the working world a couple of years ago that I realized there is such thing as the hidden job market. And oftentimes, the people that were getting promotions or were getting new jobs, were getting those opportunities because of who they knew. And so I oftentimes, think it's a big misconception when it comes to students networking in particular, that it's really about amassing as many contacts or phone numbers or email addresses that you can add to your address book or your Rolodex. And that's just not what it's about. Remember, it's about quality over quantity. And relationships with people in high places can have a huge difference. But if you don't have these relationships, don't worry. On the next slide, I'll go over some tips that you all can use to get you started. So when it comes to in-person networking, it's all about being in the right place at the right time and putting yourself in opportunities to meet and interact with others. But this can kind of materialize differently depending on the medium in which you're choosing to approach it. So for in-person networking, I typically tell students to start with who they know. Reflect on that inner circle that you have. So that would be, family or friends who may be somebody, know somebody, or know somebody who knows somebody. You never know how far this can take you. And for those of you that just don't feel like you have those relationships, I definitely recommend that you attend local networking events. These are oftentimes set up by community groups and are a really great opportunity for you to meet like-minded individuals who are also looking to connect with new people. Another tip that I like to throw out there is to join professional organizations. So this can range from the campus organizations that you're a part of or organizations that are in the industry that you're looking to join. And so oftentimes a common rebuttal I'll hear from students is that, oh, the dues are really expensive. I can't afford that as a college student. And I completely understand that. But a lot of professional organizations actually offer student memberships. And so basically these are memberships that you can get at a fraction of the price with the same benefits. And they're a really great way for you to connect with people that you have something in common with. And then the last tip I'll give for this is to prepare your elevator pitch or your TMAY. That's your tell me about yourself. And so these are basically 30-second, quick summaries about who you are, the skills you have, and your career objectives. So as a student, you might start off by discussing, where you go to school, what your major is, any professional experiences you've acquired thus far, and then where you're looking to basically take your career. And so these are really great ways to kind of kickstart a conversation with somebody and persuade them into pursuing a professional relationship with you. Remember, keep in mind that networking is a symbiotic relationship. So it's not about just what they can offer you, but it's also about what you can offer them. And so you want to make sure that this is clear and concise. And a great way to kind of speed this up is to practice with your family and friends. I know it can be kind of a little uncomfortable talking about yourself, but talking with people who care about you and can give you honest feedback is a really great way to start. And then just transitioning to virtual best practices. Oftentimes, a lot of students elect to use LinkedIn to network virtually. That's where I got my start, just because it's easily accessible and there's thousands of users on the platform that you can potentially connect with. So if you do choose to LinkedIn, you're going to want to make sure that you're optimizing your profile before you start. Studies actually show that those that actually have, optimized LinkedIns, specifically those whose profiles are complete and include a professional headshot, are 36 times more likely to actually receive a response to their message or their connection request. Remember, including that profile picture is key. People probably aren't going to connect with somebody that they kind of can't see. And so that's really important to make sure that you have that. So make it easy for them, give them a reason to want to build a relationship with you and make sure all of that is complete. My next tip that I want to leave you all with is to be goal-oriented. There's nothing wrong with reaching out to people you don't know. I do it all the time, but there is a right way to do it. So you want to make sure that you know what you're hoping to accomplish beforehand. So for a lot of students, they're networking to get a referral at their dream company. That's completely fine. While others are also kind of just looking to learn a little bit more about an industry. So make sure you know what you want beforehand. And then finally, make sure you're sending personalized messages to those people. So do a quick glance of their profile, find something that you maybe have in common, and then reach out to them with a personalized approach. It really makes a difference. And then you just want to recognize, remember that networking is about keeping relationships warm. For that relationship to be effective, it has to be warm. So I recommend that you all figure out a cadence in which you want to get in contact again with your connections. So for some people, that may be once a week. For some, it may be once a month. But I typically recommend at a minimum, it's once a quarter. So that's 4 times a year that you're going to want to be reaching out to those individuals. And then lastly, we'll discuss career fairs. So there's a couple of things that you're going to want to keep in mind before the fair, at the fair, and after the fair. So before the fair, I typically recommend that people research their target employers. So figure out maybe the top 3 to 5 companies that you want to talk with. That way you can hit them up first at the fair, just in case, time begins to run out. I typically also recommend that, you polish your resume. So use some of those tips that I provided earlier. You're going to want to make sure that if you are attending a fair in person, that you have a couple of hard copies on hand. And then if you're attending virtually, you have PDFs readily available. Again, before the fair, if you're attending virtually, make sure that you prepare your space. You don't want the attention to be focused on what you have going on in the background. You want that attention to be focused on you and what you have to offer and everything that you want to tell the recruiter about yourself. And kind of going hand in hand with that, make sure you're practicing that tell me about yourself or that elevator pitch that I talked about a few minutes ago. A really great opportunity for you to work on this is once again to practice with family and friends, and then also look at some of the resources that the internX platform provides. And then finally, when it comes to preparing before the fair, just be interview ready. Oftentimes at career fairs, they are doing interviews. They're doing first round interviews. And you want to make sure that if you're invited, you're able to interview and you feel confident doing so. Now, when it comes to actually, the day of the fair, you're at the fair, you want to make sure that you're dressing to impress. So that means, business professional attire. You want to make sure that, remember first impressions matter. So you want to make sure that those people are open to talking with you and feel like you could be a good fit for the role and that you represent yourself well. Again, you're going to want to keep that resume handy. You want to make sure that you have a pen and a notepad. If anybody asks for your resume, you want to be able to provide that to them. And then if you're getting really good information, you want to make sure that you're able to kind of write that down and keep track of all of that. I also suggest that you cast a wide net. I oftentimes think students are obsessed with going after the Googles and the Metas or the Facebooks and the Microsofts of the world. And don't get me wrong, those are all great companies. But I think people are oftentimes missing out on other great employers just because they don't have that brand name recognition. And so you never know what opportunities might be available and who you'll connect with. And then finally, be cautious of your body language and your tone. You want to sound friendly. You want to have that smile on your face. You want to look approachable. So make sure that you're being mindful of all of that. And then finally, you're going to want to make sure that you grab contact information from every recruiter or every company that you find interest in. You want to make sure that you have that on hand. That way, when it comes to after the fair, you can follow up within 24 hours. And that way you can apply to any roles that you find interesting. And so with all of that being said, that is all I have for you all today. Here are some helpful resources that I used when it came to my internship and job hunt. I know the internX learning management system has really great courses on, resume building. We talked about a little bit earlier, that elevator pitch that you all should get to work on, things like that. And then also a great book that I read when I was looking for internships and I was hunting for that full-time job is Entry Level Boss by Alexia Schoen. It has really great information that is really pertinent to students your age. And so with that being said, I'd like to thank you all for having me. If there's any questions that you have or may have after this Q&A session that's coming up next, feel free to contact me. Or if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm more than happy and willing to do so. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and transition into questions. Okay, so a question that I'm looking at is, what should a student look into when researching a company? So there's a lot of things that you're going to want to keep in mind when you're researching a company. I typically recommend that people know what that company does. So what's the service or the product that they sell? Does that align with your values? And then take a little bit of a look at, what's the company culture like? Is that a place that you could see yourself wanting to work? You're going to have to get up and go to work in that internship, 10 to 12 weeks over the summer for 40 hours a week, typically if they're full-time. So you want to make sure that's a place that you can see yourself working at. And then also when it comes to students, I also tell them to kind of learn a little bit more about what is internal mobility like at that company. Internships can lead to full-time opportunities. And if you want to increase your chances of having that full-time job on lock when you graduate, it's important that you're kind of getting to know, what's that internal mobility like? Do they offer return internships for the next summer? Do they offer those full-time jobs to students? Those are things that I would definitely keep in mind when it comes to the research process. Another question that I have is, what did I learn from my first internship experience? That's a great question. I actually learned a lot more than I thought I was. I learned a lot about what I was looking for in a full-time job. So it was great for me, just because I didn't have HR experience, to learn a little bit more about, like, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? Is this something that I can see myself doing every single day? And then another thing I kind of learned from that first internship experience, and something that I talked about in my presentation, is the importance of networking. So when I was in that internship, I would oftentimes reach out to people that weren't on my team, that were maybe on other teams throughout the company, to introduce myself and learn a little bit more about, what they do for the organization. And so that's a really great way to get yourself out there, get your name out there, have people be familiar with who you are, start to build those relationships. And it's also a really great way to explore other roles within a company. Remember, an internship, it's not a full-time job. So it's a really great way for you to kind of test to see whether or not a career or potential career path would be a good fit for you. And so I was able to get firsthand exposure into other roles at the company and really kind of determine what I wanted to do post-grad. It looks like another question that I've received in the chat is just in regards to the career advice I wished I had received as I was entering the workforce. That is a really, really great question. I think when it comes to the career advice that I wish I had received, I guess I probably wish that I had received a little bit more information just about the fact that this job that you oftentimes start with, for a lot of people, it will be their dream jobs. But for a lot of people, it won't. So that's something that I wish I had in mind and somebody had told me when I entered the workforce. It's that sometimes your first job isn't going to be your dream job. And that's more than okay, because the point is for you to grow. We don't want you to be in that first job forever. We want to see that mobility. We want to see that, that vertical mobility. So you moving up the chain of command, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something that I wish I had kept in mind. And that's some advice that I wish people had given me. And you don't have to feel locked down into a position. Obviously, I recommend that most people stay in a job for at least a year or two, really to get your feet wet, because you don't want to job hop too much. But it's also really important to keep in mind that whenever you're working for a job, you should be looking to figure out what you can learn and what you can gain out of that opportunity, and then use those experiences to kind of propel you forward. A question I have is, do you have a mentor or a coach? And how did I develop a relationship with my mentor or coach? And how has that helped you gain access to additional opportunities in your career? So I wouldn't say I had a mentor or coach. If anything, those people ended up being some of the managers that I had in some of my previous internships. I really focused on developing that relationship by, again, keeping that connection warm. So when you're meeting somebody or you have a coach or a mentor, you want to make sure that you're talking to them on a cadence that works for both of you. And so when it came to my manager, I saw that person every single day. So it was a little bit of a different situation. But again, for most people, I recommend that they at least reach out a minimum of 4 times a year or once a quarter. But when it came to developing that relationship, it was about communicating what I hope to get out of it. Remember, that mentor-mentee relationship is not about just what they can offer you, but also about what you can offer them. And so I wanted to make it very clear for that person what I was hoping to get out of the relationship and what I felt like I could provide to my manager. And so he was able to help develop me and position me to be in situations that were going to force me out of my comfort zone. So for example, one of those things was to actually give a presentation to an executive. And so I really valued him figuring out what I needed to work on and then putting me in positions to do all of that. And then as an internX alum, what advice would I give to other students that are interested in securing the internship? So the main advice that I would give students is to make sure that they're being proactive. Remember, the interview process and the recruiting season is now starting earlier than usual, and so for oftentimes that means August of the previous year. So you want to make sure that you're being proactive. You're sourcing out opportunities. You're networking with recruiters and company representatives. That way, when it's time to start interviewing, you're ready to go, and that way you're not feeling stressed out towards the end of the semester about not having an opportunity. So that's a piece of advice that I would give students or people that are interested in securing an internship.